morning, everyone. We're very delighted to welcome you to the third episode of Property Marketing Lounge. For those of you that this is the first time you've joined us, we launched this series to try and help the network to collaborate, share insights and work together across PBSA, student accommodation, co-living and build to rent. I think Sarah and I can't quite believe we're on to the third episode already. We have a whole series across the year planned, and we keep adding more topics to it. So there's lots of exciting things that we really want to discuss. So please do kind of check our website and see what we've got coming up in the future. We want to say a big thank you to our sponsor for this session today, CGI Designs. They are intrinsically involved in the PBSA market for several years. They're the go-to company for many private developers to provide high quality CGIs and create immersive and engaging content. Just looking at their website, you can see how they can make really complex spaces accessible to the student from anywhere in the world. So please do go and check them out if you're in need of some really good quality CGIs. And I'll just pass over to Sarah.
Hey, so when we discussed launching these sessions, we had a whole host of topics that we wanted to talk about. And to be frank, COVID wasn't at the top of that list. It wasn't because we didn't think it was important or it didn't have a major impact on the sector, but we thought it had been talked about quite a lot and we didn't need to keep talking. But as we moved into planning, it was a gaping hole that we knew we had to address. And obviously things have evolved and changed, you know, as time has gone on as well. So we wanted to think what it has done for the sector, what changes have happened and potentially what good has come out of it as well. What has taught the businesses about marketing and what marketeers have learned about change, its customers and the business cycle as well. We would love you to ask questions and please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will monitor the chat function as well, but we can't be sure we'll be able to get to this as often as we will the Q&A sessions. Deanie.
Cool, thank you. Once again, we're really honoured to have some brilliant guests around our virtual sofa. So a big thank you to Simon Griffiths from Unite, Tom Sutcliffe from Scape and Stuart Henderson from GSA. As ever at the lounge, we will let our guests introduce themselves. So Tom, shall we start with you?
Yeah, morning everyone, lovely to be here. I'm Tom Sutcliffe, the commercial director at Scape. Scape is a living specialist primarily focused on PBSA. Although we have a growing ambition and pipeline to expand into mainstream living with our Scape living concept. We have a current portfolio of over 30,000 beds in operation and development across the UK, Ireland, Australia, and hopefully soon to be the US. Prior to this, I've spent nearly a decade in the industry working for Student Castle and student.com.
Thank you. And Stuart?
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Sarah and Deanie, for having us along. I lead our operations teams across the north of the UK, which for us is kind of Sheffield North, Republic of Ireland and Germany at GSA. My role there is to ensure that we deliver service to students, positive employee experience for our teams and performance for our investors that will set us up to grow across the globe. Backgrounds in hospitality, I've been in the sector now for 7 years, started as a GM, general manager, opening our residencies in Edinburgh and across Scotland. So I'm in a good position to kind of recognise the challenges that are now and how they've differed in the past. GSA is an international market leader in the provision of student accommodation, now present in 9 countries across 4 continents. We've got 3 operating brands, Uninest student residencies in Ireland, Germany, Dubai and Japan, Nexo Residencias in Spain, and probably more familiar to this audience, we've got the Student Housing Company in Australia and the UK. And we've recently just entered the USA market with an acquisition of a portfolio of circa 8,000 beds, which takes us to approximately 35,000 beds globally and growing.
Great, thank you. And Simon?
Yeah, thanks for having me here today, guys. So I work for Unite Students. We have approximately 75,000 beds under management at the moment in the UK. I look after operations and sales across the portfolio. I've worked for Unite for nearly 10 years now, previously in other kind of hospitality industries. And yeah, it's great to be here today and to talk about the impact of the last kind of 18 months on the sector.
Great, thank you. And I think you just to everyone, I guess we've kind of split today up into kind of three kind of very, guiding sections, I guess. First to talk about the impact of COVID, then to talk about kind of the lessons learned, and then finally about the legacy, kind of what we're going to be left with at the end of all this. So, we don't want to focus too much on the past, but if we can take our mind back to kind of last March, which I can't still believe was a year ago, when this all started, and when we started to realise the enormity of what was happening and the implications of kind of a lockdown and what that meant. What kind of was your main priority at that time?
I think if I started off, aside from getting access to toilet roll, which seemed to be absolutely mental from March, I think for us, the first thing it was to just continue to provide kind of the highest level of welfare and support to our customers. There was so many unknowns when we went into lockdown, and it was such a changing environment week on week. We had to just try and focus on first, what can we do for our customers who are in-house, as well as obviously try and look after the staff that we had, especially the ops teams who obviously still having to come in day to day. Obviously HQ or sales and marketing pivoted towards home working, but for those guys coming in, they were the real kind of heroes, I'd say, from that starting point from March. But it was around clarity and support, I'd say, from Scape's side.
Yeah, I think we tried quickly to come out of crisis mode. I think at the beginning there were, every day was filled with a conference call with hundreds of people on it trying to work out what was going on. And we quite quickly moved into two groups, I guess, one looking at the 1920 cycle, one looking at 2021, and how we're going to deal with things, to just focus people on one thing and not try and fix everything at once, which was quite a productive way to do. Clearly, employees and customers, as well as the buildings, what was going on in terms of health and safety were really important at that time.
Yeah.
I think probably on top of that, one of the most challenging bits for all of us was just ever-changing guidance and staying up to date with that guidance, what was happening in your local area, your local market, what the different universities were doing and their approach. And I think at the time, probably all trying to find a solution that would be a one-size-fits-all, and then very quickly coming to the conclusion that doesn't exist. And really quite interesting looking at over markets as a kind of European team and then a wider global team we were meeting, and absolutely what the guys say there, trying to deal with the problem that was on your doorstep there and then, which was a bit of a mass exodus of students, teams unsure, should they be travelling to work, should they not be travelling to work, should they be staying at home, and trying to also then look forward, because we were mid-sales cycle, it was March, we're going into kind of a popular Easter period, and would be good for sales, but that wasn't the engagement we were getting from students at the time. It was what's happening, and they were getting information at the exact same time we were getting information, and trying to get a position or a strategy involved in that. Yeah, Simon said getting out of crisis mode quickly was the ideal situation, but it was really, really difficult.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, that we often always naturally put our customers first. And I think, Tom, what you were saying about the operators, I think there wasn't enough talk necessarily about that. Actually, there's still people on the ground working, and and how did you find your teams adapt to that? And also with that two dual different ways of working, you had head office staff working at home and then your operational staff still working in the environment. How was that kind of adjustment across the teams and managing that?
I think we were lucky in a way, because we'd already invested in things like Zoom and Slack prior to the pandemic, so we were quite well set up to kind of adopt to this hybrid model, where we've got all these various methods of communication, but it was about, I suppose, an element of trust and an element of scheduling those regular catch-ups and having wider catch-ups with the teams, but not getting bogged down in too many Zoom calls. I think we're all sick of them now. But back then, the go-to was jump on a Zoom call and thrash it out type of thing. So it was just about kind of spacing that out and using the right methods when needed.
I think it was tough for operational teams. If you go back to the early days, there was confusion about what was a key worker, what wasn't a key worker. Could we even go to work? Could we help people with childcare around schools and things like that, which were closing? So yeah, it was a really tough time. It was a real challenge, I think, to balance the two sides of the business. So you've got an operational side that hasn't really changed. It's at work. It's even harder with the perception that everyone else is at home having a nice time and the really nice weather, if you remember. So it took quite a lot of managing, I think. But yeah, it was a tricky few months, certainly till we got past Easter.
I think that's the key bit, isn't it? For those guys in the teams, and essentially that's my teams. They didn't really have to adapt to the way of working, but then it was having to adjust shifts. Can you get teams in bubbles? So you're actually trying to stop them having to come into contact with too many people. The nightmare for absolutely all of us is, especially if you've got a single residence in a particular city, it would be a whole team being taken out by COVID, and then how do you actually then deliver the safety and the service to your students? So trying to get things like that into play and get people to understand as well that we're trying to do this for their own safety. I think if we think about different markets as well, in Ireland, we had to issue letters to our teams to say that there was essential work that they were going in for, because they had a very different approach. They were being stopped on the way to work by the kind of Garda and going, why are you travelling? Why are you not in your house? So real different experiences we were seeing across Europe as well. Spain was a very, very different situation. So having to kind of get all these things in place, and the real challenge for us then is actually getting that over to the team to look at, is safe to go to work and why they need all these different barriers you're having to go through make you feel more and more anxious, and especially when every day it's work from home. And I think, as the guy said, for central members of staff or myself, we use the systems and kind of had to find your own rhythm to that way of working. And I think probably the hardest bit I found personally, being used to traveling kind of over Europe on a weekly basis, was not having that kind of lane time. When you've got no signal and no one can contact you and you're not on a meeting, to maybe sit and do a bit of work, or the Candy Crush, which I've not played now in about 18 months. All these things that you used to try and do to zone out, you're just constantly, your day just became Zoom meeting. And I think trying to adjust and find that way of going, I've actually still got work to do and not just speak to people. And I think that's still a continuous challenge now as we start to open up and get out on the road, meet the expectations of, or understanding of other people that no, actually, look, we're not just sat in front of the laptop all day.
And I think that's one of the kind of things around communication is like, how has communication adapted across the organisation throughout this, and are we in a better place for it because of that? Because
I think it was if you go back to the beginning, we did communicate more. You have to. I think things are changing so often, on sometimes a daily basis, that the need to tell everybody what the updated position was really important. Particularly from leadership, I think it was important that we showed the right leadership to the people in buildings working, particularly. As time has progressed, I think we've kind of cut down slightly on communication, because you're getting to the point where nothing's actually changing. So what have you got to talk about? Nothing, so don't do it. But I think the ways of communicating have changed. We've gone to kind of more of a live approach, a bit like this session, really, having senior leaders ready to answer questions, ready to talk and be more open and transparent. I think has been a really positive outcome of the crisis.
I think I've actually just come off our kind of global town hall, which is really interesting. It's got Australia on it, and that's kind of there up at whatever time of the evening it is for them, probably having a beer and having a glass of wine with town hall as the UK's getting up and everyone's still munching down the toast. But that's probably one of the things that we've put in that's kind of kept everyone together and been really interesting to let people know what's happening in other markets as well. That's something that our teams they are genuinely interested in, and looking at Australia, the different scenarios they've got there with the borders and kind of going into small lockdowns the whole time. So I think things like that will absolutely be here to stay. But other things that we introduced were just kind of like a fortnightly operational comms update, which is a bit like a newsletter, appreciating that people didn't want to be on Zoom all the time. And what I've actually started implementing amongst kind of our team is just a no Zoom Friday. So you cannot put a Zoom call in my diary on a Friday. You can still speak to me, but you'll pick up the phone. And I think we were having a laugh the other week there, remembering conference calls probably a couple of years ago when you had to all dial in and put in the PIN, and everyone was just on the phone not knowing what people were speaking. But it's just come so fast, I think, over that period now. We've become too used to this. And really, getting out into residencies over the last 4 or 5 weeks has become that, face-to-face is still the way we want to do things. Yes, this can help do less travel and all the other kind of benefits of it, but sometimes there's nothing better than getting in a room with someone and having a coffee or a beer, now we're allowed to do it, and just getting back to that kind of more face-to-face communication.
And how's that transpired for customers as well? How's that communication channels with customers?
I mean, for us, and I'm sure it'll be the same for Stuart and Simon, we had still lots of residents on site, so we still had lots of face-to-face communication. If anything, that became even more important as we went through the pandemic. But for those that weren't there, support emails, live chat, we have an app where customers can speak to one of our team at a click of a button. Social media, I think customers were they wanted clarity very quick, and rightfully so. And sometimes it was hard to give clarity when, like Stuart said, the situation constantly was evolving. So if they didn't get an answer straight away through an email, they'd take to social media, they'd take to whatever channel they could try and find. And we appreciated that it was hard for them, but it was trying to manage that expectation, I think.
Yeah, I think we got to, certainly in the first lockdown, even though customers were told to stay in residence, they ignored that pretty much straight away and just started leaving in their thousands. So it became kind of remote communications. And you're right, Tom, social media became a massive part of how we communicated. You found if we made a decision, that it would be all over social media within seconds. And the pressure to make quick decisions, I think, was massive. And I think we did well in not making quick decisions and actually just thinking a bit longer before making those decisions.
And I think the other bit for us is utilising probably apps that were already there and actually how the students communicate. So whether it was using the social media platforms, but not from the brand as such, is it using the messenger groups within your private residence Facebook groups? Is it even using WhatsApp if it's a small bubble of people that were left somewhere and needing that kind of update? So more with the residence team rather than with essential support. And we kind of other things set up. Obviously, I'm sure we'll come to kind of in terms of events and stuff, getting that flipped into remote mode quite quickly so that students were still able to communicate, and there was still, whether it was Zoom events or things like that, so that there was still that kind of feeling of community, that you were in somewhere that was safe. So I think all that, and we had to think about, do you have to have a remote reception if a team is wiped out or if a team member can't get in? So setting up kind of Zoom cameras or iPads in reception areas that someone's there present can communicate still that face-to-face, even though that you might not be able to be in the building. So there was quite a lot of innovative ways around that. But I think the other thing that became really key for us going on to the kind of students communicating were those kind of resident assistants that form part of our teams, and trying to really push. We've got a kind of wellbeing program that goes on about self-regulating communities, and that's something that 4 years ago was something we were looking to strive for, that I think the pandemic's really managed to accelerate for us. So actually students taking a bit of ownership of what is going on in their buildings and trying to manage that amongst themselves. So taking a bit of pressure off the teams, and I think that understanding that the students actually had of the teams and what the teams were doing to come in and support them has really kind of formed a good kind of bond between them, and really seeing students wanting to help the teams was something that was really nice.
Yeah, and what was that kind of that, I think one of the biggest challenges is that, for many people thought that everything just went digital, but obviously for operators, like you say, there were still people in residence. So how did you find that shift of kind of having that physical kind of community trying to develop in a remote way, and a remote community trying to develop to those at home? And what was the hardest kind of shift for that pivot from kind of digital to physical events and a hybrid?
I think the challenge was the lack of consistency, if you like. So in different cities and different buildings, the amount of people still on site varied a lot. So in some locations, you had essentially full buildings still. So your normal way of working could carry on, obviously with remote distancing and all the things that came with it. But in some, they were empty. So you had to move to very much a kind of an online presence or a social media presence or using the groups. So I think it was making sure that we kind of took each situation as it came and were flexible about things. I think that's one of the big learnings from this whole period, is just being flexible and like seeing what's in front of you and reacting to that is really important, and almost empowering local teams to make decisions. That's one of the big learnings certainly we found.
And on flexibility, I suppose for digital events and communications, you know, we found sometimes students, it was the last thing on their mind after a lecture, full day of lectures on Zoom to then spend more time on Zoom. Sometimes we did get good uptake for certain things, but we found other, things that actually helped them creatively and took them offline. So art sets, pottery packs, even knitting. Who knew that knitting would be popular? But it was just, a bit of an analog approach to something, because they spend their lives on the screens all day long.
It just took getting used to it, didn't it? I think even remember probably for us when you went through that spell in April when your catch up with your mates was becoming quizzes, and I was due to get married and we had kind of a wedding night with all my mates on Zoom, and it was just weird. It was a bit awkward. And I think it just takes getting used to going, actually, no, this is how we're doing, we're working now. And as we were probably all then working on Zoom every day, like the students would have been studying online every day. I think that people get used to how to use it, what they can do, can they play about with filters or all the stupid stuff that we were doing. So I can't even imagine the stuff that the students were probably able to work out today. But the real importance for us goes back to those resident assistants in the buildings. And I think them running the events, just it can't be understated the importance of that, because like Tom was saying, they would be speaking with the residents, so they would know what they're actually looking for. And is it something, or do I want to be on Zoom, or do I want to come down and pick something up from reception to do, give me a change, or can I set up an online PlayStation tournament? Or so they were able to take all that feedback. And I think one of the things that we identified, probably years ago when we started looking at this, was actually trying to take the residence manager away from some of these events so they don't feel like being supervised. If you think about then you're having a quiz night or you're having something on Zoom and they can see the residence manager sitting there trying to be cool and trying to fit in or not really know how the tech works, probably makes it less attractive to them as well. So knowing that they were going into a safe space online, they could have more things if they wanted to, or they were actually speaking with their peers, probably made it a lot more attractive for the students and something that they would genuinely want to participate in.
Yeah, and I agree. I wonder if also kind of that, everyone was in the scenario at exactly the same time. So having that kind of role to play would have added value. And, often in the sector, we talk about mental health and kind of having that ownership and that responsibility. All that kind of stuff really helps to make everyone feel a part of it. I guess one of the, obviously we're the property marketing strategists, and Sarah and I are both big proponents of operations and marketing working really closely together. But obviously in this scenario, when your marketing team are probably stuck at home and your ops teams are out there working, how did that kind of relationship work through, and kind of what lessons have we learned through that?
I think, it was a challenge. I think for various parts of the business, the management between the operations being at work and the rest of the business being working from home was hard. But I guess we learned to communicate more effectively. I think one of the things we have learned from Zoom is that you don't need to spend hours talking about something if you can do it quite quickly. So it became more precise, if you like, which I think certainly has its benefits, and in terms of balance can be used going forwards. I think the capability of Zoom and Teams and things were used really well to get across visual presentations. I think it's a really good medium for that. And some of the kind of the flip chart kind of work you can do now on some of the apps is really good as well. So I think it was about innovating and using the technology properly to kind of get around the challenges we had in front of us.
Yeah, I'd say as well, it was when we could do, just trying to get back out to site as soon as we could. As soon as it was legally possible to spend some more time face to face with the ops guys. Obviously, we were including them in all our digital Zoom everything, but it was just important as soon as we could to get back out there and spend time on site again with them.
Like everything, you want the experience you're not having, isn't it? I think we were all desperate to get out of houses and probably go into residences and go into cities, and they would all probably quite like to have worked from home for parts of it, or more flexibility. I think so. There is I think there is a frustration there that the teams would definitely have felt, and then same for the marketing team as an example that isn't able to get out and to go into a new market to really do the understanding and walk the city and learn about the market that they plan to be marketing like they would like to. So Tom says that there's no perfect solution. I think we try and find workarounds, but nothing does beat getting into these places. And again, as I said, meeting face to face. So it's making use of all the stuff that is available now for us that Simon's mentioned. But is that going to be the way forward? No, I don't think so. I think we need to get back to getting into cities and really getting to understand what we are trying to market.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone is eager to get back out there and to get back at doing that real physical experiencing, because we've done a long time of not doing it. Sarah, do you have any questions from yourself or otherwise?
I've got a question. I was actually working for an operator at the start of lockdown over a year ago, and managing a marketing team. And I think, the one thing that I experienced was the relentlessness of it. And, me and the team were manning social media 24/7, literally in shifts. Because like you said before, the students were so eager for information all the time and updates as well. And, that did wear off after a while, and it got a little bit more, strategic really. But from what you understand of your marketing teams and how they work, how do you think that kind of social media really took a new kind of emphasis, and it had a new maybe priority in the business as well? Has that changed the way that your companies have looked at social media, and maybe the social media executives and how that's managed?
I think. Oh, sorry.
No, you go, Simon.
I was just going to say, I think we've come to the conclusion that there are various elements of social media. So we definitely have a corporate social media, which kind of isn't relevant for this, but that was where the emphasis was before. Whereas now we've certainly had to focus on the more reactive student-based social media, and also reacting a lot quicker. They expect a response within minutes, and if you don't do that, then they'll just escalate. So I think we've definitely had to kind of scale up our social media presence and our response capability. So we've got a 24/7 contact centre in Bristol, if you like. So outside of office hours, it sits there as well to respond on. So we do have a kind of a response at any time we like, really.
I think it was almost trying to preempt what came through on social media. And I think I suppose when I think of the marketing team, what they had to go through last year, because, we needed a COVID page on the website. We needed a new policy. We needed X, Y, and Z. Everything got through at them. And then I don't know how they managed to get through all the work they did, because it was extreme pressure for them, I'd say. Because we had, everything had to go through them to make sure what we put out there was on brand, it was correct. But if we got the messages right on the website, on our communications, that hopefully it then reduced the number of questions coming through on social media, because we were already answering hopefully 90-95% of the questions students had without them needing to then come to social media for it.
You couldn't have. I'm so glad I wasn't doing that job, and my job wasn't easy at the start. So full respect to all those kind of social media guys out there that were dealing with it, because for something I think that can be so fun and beneficial, at times can really turn nasty. And even though it's not personal to the person sat with the logins to the account, I think it's difficult not to take some things like that personally. And especially, you could tell over a period of time it was kind of really wearing on the guys, and we were getting daily reports, and it was as frequent as it could be on this is what's coming through, this is the general trend. And then, as I said earlier, it wasn't just your main Twitter account or Instagram or whatever it was then going into the residents' Facebook pages or all the various different groups. So again, it was coming back to the ops people. So trying to find the right way to navigate through on what messages should be going out in social media. As I said earlier, can you find a one size fits all? And when you've got multiple investors, that's very rarely a possibility. So trying to take as much of it off social media as possible was the strategy. But that's where students communicate. That's what they use all the time. That's absolutely where they go to vent. So it was just a real difficult period of time. And yeah, as I say, those guys that are manning those pages had quite the task in front of them.
Do you think that's one of the positives, that actually across the business there's now a far wider awareness of that role of kind of communications and social media and how it can become something else if it's not managed in the appropriate way?
Yeah, definitely. If you leave it and you ignore it, that's the wrong thing to do. Likewise, if you're out there responding to every single tweet or message, it's probably the wrong thing to do as well. It's a bit of a balancing act, but you've got to listen to what comes through and look for patterns and make change accordingly, I'd say.
And I think, Tom, you hit on it before. It's about that integrated approach. It's about getting the information on your website out through all your channels. So actually, it's not people coming to you to ask the question. It's kind of like, well, it's all here. And that's that integrated approach about understanding how communications can work in a crisis, or just generally, is that people need to know where to go for the information, and then it's much easier for you to manage that should there be other issues there.
Yeah.
So that's great. If we kind of move on to kind of our next session around kind of lessons learned, kind of what we've learned, what we'll take forward, that would be good. And I guess one of the key things that I've always thought about, and in the moment, PBSA was dealing with this kind of perfect storm of things. They had kind of the A-level fiasco to deal with, they had the return to campus, they had the rising cases, the need for kind of isolation, and then we went back to another lockdown, and we were back to that place where students were going and leaving. And I think, from an outside perspective, one of the things, having worked, a long time of my career in PBSA and student accommodation, was that actually, like we've already said, there was operators really working hard to deliver this. They were going above and beyond to do the best thing for students, but that wasn't getting into the media, that wasn't getting into the press. It was the other side of the story that was getting into the press. Do you think that there needs to be a sector-led voice to argue these cases, and do you think this is maybe something that is needed going forward?
I think I think from a UK perspective, there's bodies there, and I think that's, when I compare that to some other markets where there is absolutely no voice and you are done to, whether it's by legislation or whatever else, I think in the UK we're in a better position to influence. I think there's various different challenges, obviously, of is everyone involved with some bodies or not, but if I think to the ones that we work with, Unipol, they've kind of done really well making sure that various information is kept up to date on the website. It's been pointed out time and again by Martin Blakey there, though, that anything distributed by the government only appears to go to universities and not the PBSA sector, and is very university kind of driven. If I think about Scotland, kind of through the Azure group led by Joe Player, we've been on with the Scottish Government at least once a month. So as a PBSA sector, that's been really useful for everyone to go on and speak direct to the government and properly educate the government on what we are as a sector, because it was really quite staggering to see that they didn't understand that we're not universities. We don't operate in the same tenancy agreements as universities, and this is coming from the government. So really trying to understand what we could and couldn't do, and being able to ask for support, which didn't come. We're able to try and put these things in place and have that voice. I think they did really well. I've also been on some kind of the BPF calls, and they've been useful. So I think that there are voices that do good work. I think the hardest thing for us as a sector, though, and it's kind of probably unlikely to change in the near future, is that one university will have a very different approach from the next, and sometimes that's in the same city. So as someone, as operators that are going to have students from multiple universities in your buildings, you're not able to probably form those types of partnerships that say we can all work together. And I think that's something that's been difficult. But again, there's been some good practice that's been through this time. I think in Newcastle, the universities in the kind of northeast have had some good sessions that have come together. I've touched on some of the stuff in Scotland. So I think one thing that I've spoken about before is that we need to kind of develop this further, and it goes back to whether there's commercial agreements in place or not commercial agreements in place. These students are a shared responsibility of us as operators and also those universities we work with. So more collaboration between that and the sector, I think, will only be added benefits to everyone.
Yeah, I'd second that what Stuart said. I think the distinction between kind of the levels of service and support between university and halls and PBSA it's definitely been blurred. What we put in there is this full package versus maybe something that is slightly different. But it is where, credit to Unite in that first lockdown. Simon, you came out leading the way in terms of the policy to release students. But not every landlord had that same approach. So it's hard if we're not all singing off the same hymn sheet. And I know it's impossible for everyone to maybe do that, but it would be interesting to see if we could have some sort of more senior voice or a bigger presence there to educate more of the wider market on what PBSA does.
I guess on that then, we're lucky in a way because we have one group of investors to talk to, and that's hard enough. But I guess you've got multiple versions, that's difficult. So we were able to make that decision relatively quickly when it happened. Throughout the process, I guess we talked to Public Health England quite a lot, to elements of government. We've got quite a new but exciting press external media team who are really keen to get involved in that kind of thing. I think there's that aspect of it as well. If you read the media, it's generally quite negative about student accommodation without any clear difference of what it is and the differences the guys have mentioned. So there is definitely an approach to kind of make it clear what we do. We're not universities, and therefore the challenges we have or the things we can do that are different.
Yeah, it feels like there's an opportunity for that, that conversation, because we are there and we are there to support the students, and but there are lots of challenges there, and it kind of like you say, it's not that isn't always able to be put into the right places, which is unfortunate. Was there something in this kind of scenario that you thought that wouldn't work and did work?
I think one thing we did, and it related more to the sales for the 2021 academic year, but we obviously had these, beds that were sitting there empty, and we put out a campaign around checking in early for free. We didn't know whether we'd get much uptake or any uptake, but we had, I think, over 300 students actually take us up on that campaign and check in early for free prior to the start of their lease date, and that really helped. I think it was just something that was, it was a no-brainer to us, and we didn't know, but it's something that was really effective, I'd say.
I think for me, it's probably some of the stuff in the student experience, and some of that probably experiential marketing or through our kind of wellbeing program that I touched on earlier, in terms of remote stuff working better than I probably expected. A couple of examples would be in Dublin, some of our residencies kind of got together to do a UniNest Games, which are kind of flat versus flat, a residence versus residence, completely remote. So in kind of expanding the community that people would have already within their building to other residencies within the city. And I think, what that done in terms of fantastic social media content for the brand, engagement with the residents, just as importantly, the teams kind of had real good fun as well. So I think things like that, I was really pleasantly surprised on things like that working. I think just those kind of remote events and engagement in general, as we said, it sounds like it can get quite tedious quite quickly, but the teams managed to keep that level of fun, community spirit going for months on end. And a really good example in Newcastle, our residents there, No Core, achieved the highest ever recorded NPS of 79, They did that during a pandemic when residents couldn't use the facilities at the residence or at the university. They might even have moved home already and just wanted to stay engaged with the community. I think things like that are amazing and absolutely exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, I'd say from an employee experience point of view, we have a kind of an annual recognition night, if you like, ceremony, which clearly we haven't been able to do in person for 2 years now. But we've managed to do it remotely by getting drinks and food to people's houses, using kind of clever online ways to recognise employee success. I think you don't realise how important it is to people until there's a threat it's not going to happen, and you get bombarded with emails and WhatsApp from every man and his dog trying to make sure it happens. So just making sure we carried on celebrating employee success, I think, was really important through this period.
Agreed. And what would you say is the best decision you made amongst all the changes?
Well, my answer probably wouldn't be shared throughout the business. I think from a customer and sales perspective, I think we adapted well to the flexible needs of students and understanding that decision-making process that we're going through. I think Tom touched on, in terms of doing early check-ins, so we introduced that kind of flexi pay, flexi stay policy. That kind of meant that you didn't have to pay from a specific contract start date, but if and when your course started face-to-face teaching, that's when you would start paying. So introduce more semesters and short-term lets, and really just trying to understand students did not know what they were going into, so how can you keep it flexible for them? So I think from a sales and operations perspective, that was something that was good and needed. But I think probably from a commercial finance or reporting perspective, it's been a lot more challenging to understand, forecast, some of that impact. But ultimately, I think that's the nature of the challenge that we've had and we've had to deal with. And I think it was absolutely the right thing for us to do, and it's benefited us.
I think that is, Sarah and I talk about this all the time, this kind of flexibility. And I think one of the things that from all the research that we read is that, there is, now that we've had this year and now the students have experienced that they can make choices about where they study, where they live, is this kind of push to flexibility. Do you think that is going to be something that we stick with and say, and is it, conversations that you're having now? And, like you say, Stuart, it's not without its challenges. Is the sector ready for it?
I think it's difficult. I think it is, but it's whether that becomes, I don't think it will be a big bang. If you can sell a residence at 100% occupancy and a 51-week let, that's what you're going to do. That's going to be the model that you put in. And there's absolutely markets out there where that still exists. I think whether it's on flexibility in the stay, but if you look at how probably the sector's even changed over the last 2, 3, 4 years, whether it's deposits are pretty much now a thing of the past. Majority of operators have moved away from deposits now. You look at cancellation policies this year, I think they've become far more generous. And that kind of short-term offering in some markets, whether it's semester stays or is it other types of kind of void backfills. And trying to understand that as a market, that's something, Sarah, remember, in terms of a lot of the residencies in my area have huge summer potential. So you're having to introduce that kind of more flexible offering is essential, but it doesn't come easy. It doesn't come, it comes at a cost as well. And getting the balance and doing that right is really, really difficult. So I think for me, there's going to be bits that the students are going to expect. I think, looking at this cycle at the moment is going to be another late cycle. How does the market kind of hold its nerve? And we've seen that over other markets over years gone by. You get into August and does it go to price slashing, or do you need to become a bit more inventive with what you're doing? That's what we've seen over the past, whether it's cashback offers or whether it's no deposits or more flexible stays. So what is the way that you can actually find something that becomes more flexible, allows you to keep your market rate, if you like? And a good example again in Ireland is the legislation that came in there a couple of years ago, which introduced a rent cap. effectively meant that no one cuts price, because if you cut your price, you can't get back to your price. So you need to find more inventive and flexible and agile ways to be able to still be incentivising your students and remain competitive within your market, but not always go for price. And sometimes that comes into a more flexible kind of contract length. But yeah, I think for me, we're seeing it in some markets, probably more so in Europe than the UK at the moment. But I think it will grow in some of those other kind of more competitive markets quicker than some others in the UK.
Yeah, I think it's about those things. I think we all have beds in buildings that are broadly the same. That's not the differential. It's either the price, the flexibility, or the kind of lifestyle you're offering. So you can see even now how lifestyle is important. So if people want quiet buildings versus vibrant, exciting, loud buildings, it's being clear with people what they're getting, I think, and we can be a lot more sophisticated, I think, going forwards on how we do that. So I think the days of like mass rooms with just all kinds of people in them are dying out potentially. There will be buildings, of course, where you have that, but I think the choice for students will be more varied in terms of who they live with and how they live. Almost who their tribe is, I suppose, is the best way to put it.
I think Stuart touched on the flexibility as well in terms of all those other campaigns you can run: no visa, no pay, travel restriction, no place, no pay, all these types of things before you get to that point of, say, slashing rents. And understanding, semester one versus semester two, it's always something that we've looked at, because there's quite a lot of demand there. I suppose it's asset by asset, because we're heavily London focused. And you get a lot more demand all year round, say in London, than say somewhere further north potentially.
And Stuart, you kind of mentioned about the delayed let up for this year. Kind of what's your biggest findings that you're finding in this kind of current let up, and what's changed, what's shifted?
Yeah, so I think Sarah knows, but I'm normally a glass half empty type approach to this, and always thinking the worst. So I'm actually sitting here pleasantly surprised with kind of how the lease up's going. And some markets we've had some residencies hit fully booked already, direct let markets, which is great. Other places that I was maybe more concerned about that have really rocketed on over the last few weeks. So I think I've definitely seen a movement over that last kind of maybe 2 months of kind of accelerated sales, which is great. I think what's been really great to see is the rebooker performance within that. So that goes back to what we were saying about that real kind of strong experience, especially for those that did stay, have helped kind of drive some of those kind of early sales performance, and amongst more flexible cancellation policies, so, and all these other things. There's probably still a day of reckoning to come when you get to that kind of D-Day and people will start to make the decisions. There's probably some markets. I was on a kind of Unipol session a couple of weeks ago, and I think they're saying that the UK is probably looking about 15 to 20% behind last year, and a lot of that will be driven by international markets. What we're seeing probably a lot of international students do right now is book multiple markets, and that's not thinking they'll book Sheffield and Newcastle. It's they'll book the UK and they'll book Germany, or they'll book kind of hedge their bets across coming into Europe and where they go. So and that will depend on what's the COVID status of the country. So I think probably one of the things that we saw last year was that the COVID impact changes so quickly that it can all change. And we're all going along nicely at the moment. Maybe the news a few days ago regarding some of the Indian variant. It's all been looking quite positive from my UK perspective, and I think that's helped drive some of those kind of sales come through. Let's see what happens as things change. I think there's going to be ebbs and flows throughout the cycle, and it's really, again, go back to agility, flexibility. These are the things that are probably going to help you continue to fill beds for this cycle.
Yeah, we've seen that acceleration over probably the last 6 to 8 weeks. Those macro factors, the vaccination program, the policy from Australia in terms of their borders. Speaking with the guys on the ground in China, the UK is seen in a positive light, and there are lots and lots of international students who still want to come and study in the UK, and it's now viewed as actually more of a safe place to come. But aside from all those kind of things, you know, it does come back to your location, your quality of product, your service level as well. So there's some fundamentals you can't change with what you're offering. And we've definitely seen that acceleration, which is positive. It needs to keep going.
I think that's fair. I think the challenge markets that were challenge markets 2 years ago are still challenge markets, regardless of COVID. That won't have changed it. I think the international kind of pickup has happened, needs to carry on for another 4 months, would be 3 months, would be good. I think the view of the UK abroad, particularly China, is really positive at the moment. That's really important. I think we can carry that on. That'd be fantastic. And yeah, it's going to be a busy August. I think that's fair to say with everybody. So I think, you know, as the August goes through, if I was a student, the longer you leave it, the better deal you're going to get. But yeah, that's what I think what's going to happen throughout August.
Probably the bit that we didn't touch on is that clarity or more positive noises coming out from the universities on what's the type of teaching. I think I've seen some stuff on the BBC yesterday, the day before, which is still talking about hybrid, which, you know, is our expectation, but most of the research that I read will still tell us students don't want online learning. They want face-to-face. Yes, there might be some things that they want to keep about it, but ultimately they want the full student experience, and especially international students. So, you know, as much as a positive message coming from government, it will then go back into, as we said earlier, what's that particular university that they want to go to, what's their approach to it, and then that might be, okay, UK is looking attractive, but is Edinburgh doing something that UCL isn't, or, you know, how are they looking at these things, and really wanting that positive message, hopefully, to be able to start coming out from universities. And a bit more clarity around, okay, so what is the academic calendar looking like? We've seen some universities in Ireland shift over the last couple of weeks, just by a couple of weeks. But that all has an impact on that kind of customer decision making. So hopefully we do see more positive noises coming out over the coming weeks.
I was going to say, I think you can almost map out kind of the communication that universities give out. The more clarity they give, kind of the more bookings we see within those markets. And that's been a trend throughout these last 12 months, definitely.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the concept of when people talk about blended learning, when it's done in the right way, universities talk about the end of like the 500, 600 person lecture as a good thing, because it enables lecturers to, you know, do online recordings and focus on teaching the points they're trying to get across. But clearly that'll be done with the need for people to be in place for semesters and group work. So I think some of it is just PR around it and how they phrase things. So, you know, if they could, you know, get aligned on that, I think it would be productive, because you do see, as Tom said, when there's clarity, you get people make decisions.
And I think the whole conversation around hybrid learning, it will be there, universities will be offering it, but that doesn't negate from the fact that students are still saying they want that experience. So, but they might want to be able to do that lecture in their student room as opposed to on campus. And I think that's, you know, that's a positive thing for PBSA. That's what the research is kind of saying. Sarah, do you have any questions? Oh, you're still on mute.
Yeah, try on. Yeah, we've had a question actually from one of our viewers, from David White, and he's asking a few questions around kind of the safety side of things. Is that something that you're still kind of focusing on? Are you still going to be having additional cleaning protocols in place? You know, maybe anti-bac all over the place. Is that something that you're putting in that is demanding, that people are still talking about on site?
Yeah, I think we have to. I think particularly from international customers, it's expected. So if we suddenly decided we weren't doing any of the, you know, particularly the sanitizing and the cleaning, the visible cleaning as well. So I think they like to see things being cleaned. That's what we've noted over the past kind of year. Yeah, we'll carry on with that approach, because I guess if you're a parent as well, the messages around safety and security and cleanliness are really important, particularly in this time. So I think it's something that the sector kind of has to keep doing to reassure parents, I guess.
It almost becomes a standard, doesn't it? That we, you know, it's expected now, but it's something that we still have to market and push.
Yeah, I guess the visible cleaning is an important impact, because that kind of proves it's happening really, rather than you saying it. And the next part of the question really is about kind of, is it a tick box exercise, or is the quality of cleaning and the products being used, is that something that's still very much, a conversation in operations and procurement, and can you see it being a long-term kind of fundamental change, really?
I think, when the pandemic started, the procurement team at Unite were all over trying to secure, all those various products that were in short supply at the time. But now we've got a pretty well established kind of supply chain that conforms to the criteria that we need it to, and it's checked on a regular basis. I guess, the proof's in the pudding, is that you're only as good as the person cleaning the door handle or whatever. So it's down to operators locally to make sure that's happening. But I think it's here to stay.
You can't afford it to be tick box, can you? Because ultimately, if you get the outbreak and go back to all those problems that we had in March, and we're talking about, and it's not just your resident safety, it is your team safety. So I think the teams almost want to do it as well, so they feel like they are working in a safe environment and they know that responsibility is theirs, to make sure it's done.
Great, thank you. And we've only got a few minutes left, which seems to have gone really quickly, that hour. And I guess it'd be good to just talk about kind of the legacy and what you feel is going to be the biggest change that's going to come. What's the most positive thing that you think is going to come out of the year that we've been through and that we're still going through, and that when we are out the other side, what are we going to thank COVID for?
I think it's contributed to a decrease in bureaucracy, if I'm honest, because in this situation where no one can leave, the decision makers are much further down the kind of operational chain. Like, people are making decisions on what's in front of them, and I think that's really, really important, and something that'd be really good to stay. Like, the guys on site can see what's happening. They should be empowered to make decisions, within a framework, of course. But I think that's really positive.
I think and everyone says this, but probably the sense of community. From what we saw, the residents within our buildings, seeing that sense of community develop out, and it's so important these days in terms of mental health, that kind of human connection, and that actual chance to see people and speak to people and value that sense of connection. I think is probably the best thing. And I think that's for everything, not just in PBSA, but in general, I'd say.
Yeah, I was really heartened. I was out visiting Ablett House in Liverpool about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and firstly, during Easter, how many students were there occupying the building, but just the interactions between the students and the team that were there was so positive. And for a few hours, aside from masks and screens up on reception desks and sanitizer everywhere, you could almost genuinely forget there was a pandemic, because there was people talking positively about what they've been doing. I think, as I said earlier, kind of seeing residents genuinely happy, who thoroughly appreciate the kind of sacrifices, the hard work and genuine care of them that the teams of managing the buildings have put in was really quite touching. And I think for those of us who work in central roles and spent a lot of the last year working from home or working in a marketing role, we maybe not had the opportunity to get out to our residents due to the pandemic. It's probably easy to forget and understand what we are actually trying to achieve in this sector. And it's it's not just selling a room, it's not just heads on beds. There's so much more to it. And I think it's that whole customer satisfaction and understanding piece that has really come to the fore, and dealing with that and listening to your students stops that social media problem that we talked about maybe 13, 14 months ago. And it's really made everyone kind of remember, what we're doing, and the real activity in this sector happens in the buildings. It doesn't happen in ivory towers, as one's called it. So yeah, I think it's back to basics.
No, yeah, that's all good. And I think, I think we're going to have to close now, so I'll pass over to Sarah in a second. But I think one thing that I've reflected on, and I've always said this, but I think it's important that we do, is to thank all those operational staff out there for the year that they've had. And I'd give them a big round of applause, because I think they have done an amazing job and really done a great thing for the sector in kind of showing what PBSA does and what student accommodation does in looking after their students. And I think a big round of applause to all your teams across the country that are doing that to this day. And thank you all for joining us. That's been brilliant. I'll pass it over to Sarah to close.
So thanks everyone. That was really interesting, and although it's been a difficult year, it's great to see how things have changed. And it's just, I think we can all say it's accelerated change. It was probably there, but it's prompted everyone to make decisions to improve itself for customers, teams and investors as well. We will be back on June the 22nd with our next session, which is sponsored by Stuart, and we'll be talking all about data and how it should be used to make marketing decisions. Please go to the website and register. Also, if you've got a topic that you would like us to discuss, interested in sponsorship or would like to be a guest, please get in touch. We will be making a recording of this webinar available so you can watch it again or share with colleagues. In addition to mine and Deanie's full consultancy service as part of the Property Marketing Strategist, we also have a bite-sized service making it accessible to you regardless of time or budget. And to celebrate, those who have registered for any of our webinars so far can get 20% discount off our service. So do get in touch if that is of interest to you. And finally, can I just say a big thank you to everyone joining us, and especially to Simon, Tom and Stuart for their engagement and support in the Property Marketing Lounge. Please come back for another session sometime. Thank you.